Welcome to the German small group meeting with the International Institute of Genealogical Studies, found at genealogicalstudies.com. My name is Drew von Hasselbach, and I am a mentoring professor with the Institute. This session, Confirmation Records, the Rodney Dangerfield of genealogical documents, is being recorded. So, here we go. I can't do a Rodney Dangerfield impersonation, and maybe you don't know who Rodney Dangerfield was, but he was a famous comedian from um, mostly the last century, but also part of the 2000s. And his tagline was "No respect, no respect." He would go on and tell stories about his life and about how he didn't get any respect. And here's one of his lines. Last week I looked up my family tree. Two dogs were using it. Boom, boom. So just a classic sort of Catskills kind of comedian. And I think of no respect when I think of German confirmation records. Um, I don't recall actually being taught a lot about confirmation records when I was learning genealogy myself. Um, I do find that with all the various services in the world, Family Search, Ancestry, and so on, they tend to be unindexed. If you're lucky, you will find some instances where they are indexed. They're often lost. I don't know if churches and church repositories spend a lot of time trying to save them and protect them. And they're certainly not in the conversation when we're talking about things like baptisms and marriages and burials. They're often forgotten. So maybe they get no respect. Maybe they are the Rodney Dangerfields of genealogy. But let's take a moment to think about what they actually are. So confirmation, it's a religious ceremony, and it's the moment where a young adult, an adolescent, becomes a member of the church. Now, in this presentation, I'm mainly thinking about Lutheran church records in German-speaking communities. Catholics have confirmation as well, but it occurs in other denominations and in other religions. But Lutheran confirmation is really quite something that's part of German culture. It's quite a big thing. It might even be akin to like a quinceañera or bar mitzvah, especially in even today in Germany. It's a big thing. So what actually happens? Kids around the age of 13, 14 or so, they're taught Martin Luther's Catechism. It's an instruction book to the Lutheran Church, or the church as he thought it should be explained to people. They go through his book. You usually learn it by rote, by memory. The instruction can take a couple of years. And at the end, there's a ceremony, there's a service during which the youth comes before the congregation and confirms their baptism. See, when you have infant baptism, you're only a couple months old, you're just an infant, you're not in a position to actually talk to the congregation and make your vows to the church. So confirmation is that moment in the future when having the faculties to speak and everything, you can confirm your belief and then be admitted to the church. So that's what confirmation is. But I do think they deserve a bit of respect as genealogical documents. And I'd like to talk a little bit about where you can discover them and how you can use them. And I'd like to do that by looking at this. This is a case study, we'll call it a case study. This is Daniel Langert. He was confirmed in 1879. Now, where did this happen? It was in I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, so I apologize, but Royzitche, which is now in Ukraine. When he was confirmed in 1879, it would have been still Ukraine, but it would have really been called part of Russia. It might even been over the border in Poland, because these documents are actually found in the Polish archives. Um, but at the time, he was in a German-speaking community. It was called Volhynia. You may have heard this term if you've done some German research. Volhynia was it was a part of Ukraine, a little bit of Poland, where there was a lot of German settlement. So even though this was Poland, Russia, Ukraine, uh, countries that we would think of today. At the time, there was a massive German population there, and they were people who only spoke German. Like they didn't, German wasn't like their mother tongue, and then they learned the local language. They lived and breathed and carried on in German. So uh, Daniel, his parents belonged to the local Lutheran church or evangelical church. Evangelisch is the word in German. Um, they didn't necessarily use the word Lutheran like we're used to. They would often say evangelical or evangelisch. So Daniel attended the local Lutheran church and he went through the period of instruction and seems to have passed because his entry is found here in the confirmation registry for 1879. Let's look at what it tells us. It says when and where he was confirmed. So he was actually confirmed in the community of Marinkow Bereski on the 5th of April, 1879. Um, and this record tells us what his grades were from his instruction. So for reading, he got a mark of quite well. For knowing his catechism, he got a mark of good. And for his knowledge of Holy Scripture, he got a mark of weak. So uh, still, weeks have passed. So he was, confirmed. And all of this information is recorded in the registry here. In fact, we can take a closer look at this. And you can see how it all line up. What I have here is the top of the page, and that gives you the headings, so you know what information is recorded down below. And then we have the handwritten entry where we can see what is written about Daniel. And if we spread this up a bit, we can take a closer look. And we'll see there's a bunch of biographical tidbits in here. There's a bunch of really interesting genealogical information in here. So the first thing in this column, the German tells us that this column records month and day of confirmation, sex or gender, baptism, and family name of confirmand or confirmierten. Confirmand is the name of the person who is to be confirmed. And the handwritten entry tells us that it's Lingert Daniel. And we pass on to the second column, where we're going to learn about his parents. We learn the baptism and family name of the father, mother, or parental guardian, along with the occupation, rank, or profession of the father, mother, parental guardian, whoever it was that was affiliated with the church and whatever household Daniel lived in. And in this case, we learned that he lived with his father, Ferdinand Legert, and his mother, Henrietta. And his father is described as a settler in Sastro. I'm not calling on you to decipher the German handwriting, but it does say COL, which is short for colonist. So a farmer or a settler in the farming community of Sastro. And then we look at some really genealogically interesting information, the place and year of birth. This tells us that Daniel was born in Karolino or Karolino in Grodzice, which is today I believe in Poland. And he was born in the year 1863. It might look like a 62, but I took a closer look and indeed it's 1863. So if you don't have a baptism record for Daniel, you now have some basic information about when and where he was born. And without the baptism record, this may be the only official record that tells you anything about when and where he was born. We now have those marks, as I mentioned, the knowledge of the confirmand as it's described in the document. For reading, he got quite good. For catechism, good. And for knowledge of Holy Scripture, weak. So um, maybe Daniel had to do some supplementary reading later on. I don't know, but he did pass. So um, weeks is still good enough. Uh, that's a lot of information. Like I think that's fantastic amount of information, actually. Yet these documents, I just think they get no respect. What would Rodney Dangerfield say? You know, I looked at my family tree and all I found, I was the sap. So anyway, um, let's take a closer look here. Oh, by the way, this is what you get when you ask Chat GPT to give you a picture of Rodney Dangerfield looking like a German schoolboy. So the wonders of AI. We're teaching you AI here at International Institute of Genealogical Studies. Um, well, let me tell you why I think these records matter. I mean, I'll be repeating that over and over, but I really do think these records matter. Here's an example of quite a wonderful confirmation certificate that one of my relatives has received. But if you've been following along and you were listening to what I was my presentation on Daniel, you would learn that, well, of course, we got an alternative source of birth info, but you also got a lot of personal details about the family. Um, One thing that we did get into, because you only looked at that one line of information, is all the other kids that were confirmed are in that document. So you can start to build networks. You can start to see siblings or cousins or friends, neighbors, um, people in this individual's community. You might even see the name of the person that that youth winds up marrying. I've seen that happen quite a bit, actually. Um, so you get this networking situation going on. Really useful because if you're dealing with a lot of German records of this vintage, is you'll have a baptism record, and then you may have nothing. You may not know where the person went. You may not have a marriage record. You may not have a death certificate. This at least tells you that that person survived to um, adolescence, um, which probably is a good indication that they did, live a bit longer after that. They didn't die as an infant, which happened all too often in those days. So that's a really useful thing there. Um, you can get some sense of migration and settlement, like notice how we learned where Ferdinand's father was described as a settler in the community. Well, that means he obviously came from somewhere else. So there's a hint that there's more research to be done on his father and where he's from. And there's a reflection of the religious culture. Very important in genealogy because in this time period, parish records are the records. So we know that this family was Lutheran, evangelical. That's where the records are going to be found for other seminal events in the lives of these people. Now, I say they get no respect. I want to share this with you. This is an extract from a strip of film that's available on Family Search, and it's a standard collection of, as it says, indexed baptisms, marriages, and deaths for this community from, the late 1700s to 1817, it says here. And then there's baptisms, marriages, and deaths from 1854 to 1870. This is in the community of Czernowitz, which is today it's in Ukraine, but right on the border of Romania. The province or the local area was called Bukovina. It's a really interesting area because there were so many different ethnic groups there. So there was about 6 major ethnic groups in the city, of which German was one. Anyway, these Lutheran records, they're all set up and indexed as if the only thing you'll find in there, baptisms, marriages, and deaths. Yet, I want to draw your attention to that square in the center where the eye is. And if we take a closer look and bring that into focus, you'll see that this is actually a page from the confirmation record. Now, it's just 1 year. It's just left here from 1847. And there's like 16 boys who are listed here and 8 girls. It's probably hard for you to make out some of the names, but you'll actually see some similar family names, which indicates there might be some relations amongst these people. Um, if you know anything about Western Canada, which is what I know a lot about, you'll actually recognize a lot of the names here. Runzer, I see Ulrich, I see Kunzelmann, I see Michel, I see Murhart. Those are names that are so common in Saskatchewan today. So, and we know a lot of people from that community migrated to Saskatchewan and also North Dakota, Manitoba, Alberta. So there's this whole community that's on this page, the single page, 1847, just forgotten, and it's not even indexed. So that's why I'm thinking, they get no respect, but it's just loaded with information. In fact, I would call these the yearbooks of their day. Okay. Confirmation was arguably as culturally significant to Germans of Eastern Europe as high school graduation is to us today. Um, Alongside the names of the ancestors that you'll find in these records, you're going to see the names of their classmates. You're going to see the names of their neighbors, their siblings, their cousins, their peers. And as I mentioned, it could even be the name of their future spouse. This could be how your ancestor met their future spouse. In fact, I can give you an example of just what a big deal this is in Germany. For the call, I was talking about East Germany. And in the days of the East German communist government, which was, not a religious government at all, um, confirmation was so embedded in German culture that the communists had to create a secular equivalent. They call it the Jugendweihe. It was the same type of thing but instead of studying religious matters, they studied um, the morality of the community and um, the government and the philosophy of the governing party and that sort of thing. And then they had a public ceremony where they declared their loyalty or their affinity or whatever in an almost religious kind of way, except it was a secular meeting. The communists had to come up with something to replace a religious ceremony that was so ingrained in the culture that it couldn't just be forgotten. So this is why confirmation, it really matters. Now, it's a cultural milestone. Um, if you have relatives yourselves or as you're doing research, you may come across certificates like this. Confirmation often happened around the age, it's anywhere between 13 and 17. 14, 15 is very common. And a confirmand received a certificate, just like this one. And you can see that it's kind of an official looking document. Remember when I said it's almost like high school graduation? This looks a lot like a diploma. And I can even show you what this says. Julius Buchholz, age 17, having received the necessary religious instruction and demonstrated sufficient knowledge in the public examination. Well, I do believe that sometimes these kids were questioned in front of the congregation. So I'm not sure you had to do that when you graduated from high school, but that's an interesting thing to consider. He was admitted to the Evangelical Church, which, as I said, that's the Lutheran Church, on the 24th of March, 1864. And they make a note here of the Augsburg Confession. That's the particular branch of the Lutheran Church, at least as it was in Eastern Europe at the time. So that's what Augsburg Confession was. Um, and what happens when you get admitted to the church? You are entitled to receive Holy Communion. So he could now have communion. Um, so where can you find these records? Well, familysearch.org has some. Sometimes they're noted in the catalog. There's an organization called the SGGEE. That's the Society for German Genealogy in Eastern Europe. Um, I call it the SGGEE. You can Google it and track down their website. Um, they have done a really good job of providing indexes to confirmation records that are available in various locations. Archaean.de, that is a pay site. It's run by the Evangelical or Lutheran Church in Germany. They are gradually scanning every record they can in their um, jurisdiction. There's a lot that's there. I can't say that it's cheap, but yeah, and it's you do have to have a pretty good knowledge of German, I would say, to be able to navigate your way through the books. But if you can, you will find lots of information. And then Ancestry.com. Um, it has the information, but it won't necessarily tell you. And I want to take you through this. There's a little methodology we can use to find confirmation records after a baptism. Remember, we're looking for about 12 years after birth. Um, and you're looking for about 2 or 3 pages of information. And I'm going to show you how this might work. If we go to the city of Magdeburg and we find the evangelical records there, you'll see that the parish record looks like a lot of records you might be used to seeing, names, parents, dates, and so on. Cool thing though, if you flip to the end, and this isn't indexed, you will find a handwritten index of all the names that are in the preceding pages. So I don't know if you're aware that that is actually captured there, but it's not going to be for every baptism record or every parish record, but it's often the case that those records have been indexed at the back manually, as is done here. But here's the thing, if I flip over another page, I find the confirmation registry. And none of those names are indexed, yet the information is all there. And like I said, um, there's a trove of information. Just repeating this over and over, the 5 things you're going to learn from this, whether somebody, whether an infant survived childhood, the social network and the connections of peers, classmates, relatives, it's all laid out on the page there. Those great genealogical details, birthplace, birth date, they're there, names of parents. Um, Here's the thing I haven't mentioned yet. You'll learn how somebody was actually known because they'll use the name that that person was using. See, when people are born, particularly in German records, sometimes they'll have 3 or 4 names, and they didn't necessarily follow the same tradition we use where the first name is the name that somebody's known by in most cases the rest of their lives. So this way you'll find out the name that they were commonly known by. And another thing I haven't talked about, but really file this away because it's something that if you're doing a lot of German research, you will find useful. This is one way you can teach yourself how to read that old German handwriting. See, when you're familiar with the names, you can read the names and you can see how they're written on the page, and you can start to train your eye and your mind to decipher some of the letters as they were made in 19th century and older German handwriting. So that can be really useful. Um, I'm going to pause right here. Uh, um, Pause my recording. Actually, I am going to take some questions in a minute, but first, I had fun, and I hope you did too. I want to remind you to check out some of our videos on YouTube. Give this video a like, leave a comment, hit that subscriber button. Don't be afraid to ask us a question. We'll try and get back to you. For those of you who are interested, our next German small group meeting is Wednesday, January 14th at 2026. International Institute of Genealogical Studies students can catch it live here, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. Otherwise, perhaps we'll see you again on YouTube. My topic for next January, I'm going to look at borders. I'm going to look at borderline Germany. Was your ancestor actually from Deutschland? So we'll try and track down the history of the borders of Germany. Thanks for joining us. For more information, please visit genealogicalstudies.com.